Okay. Interesting. This is a live stream.
Okay. I finally, after like 6 months, just figured out the Instagram. So
Yeah.
you got to go live there and then. Okay, cool. Mics are hot.
All right. I can't hear you.
Did you want the blinds closed? Oh,
Sorry?
You're in the air.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
All good.
Hold on.
This is my favorite song.
I could tell.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another delicious and nutritious episode of the Silicon Zombies, where we're at KPCR 92.9 FM in Los Gatos and 101.9 FM in beautiful Santa Cruz. Well, what a thrill it is today to have a dear friend and just a marvelous human being. We got Daniel Idzkowski on the mic. This is long overdue. So, Danny, welcome to the show.
See you, Nick.
Awesome. Well, before we get started, we are in the middle of the Frosty Frequency fundraiser, and I believe we're in transition to the spring fundraiser. So if you'd like to support local radio, and check out donate.kpcr.org, and we'd be happy to collaborate and explore collaborations further. So awesome. Well, before we go any further, Danny, you're almost like the mayor of San Francisco, or the king of capital in the Bay Area. You're an investor, you're an entrepreneur, and the title of the show today is Power to the People, because I believe that the products and the community that you build really has a foundation of lifting others up, right? So maybe let's get started with Skunk Lock. Can we just right off the bat? I want to get into that, if that's all right.
Sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and then jump into Skunk Lock if you could.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a San Francisco native, born and raised in San Francisco, but family came from Poland, escaped communism in the mid 80s. And I was just very serendipitously lucky to go up there. I grew up in Soma back when it was just a salami factory, trailer park, and parking lots.
And you're old.
Am I aging myself a little bit? But honestly, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.
Yeah.
I got to see everything change and evolve. And I grew up around maybe not as much innovation in that part of the world, but I did grow up around the right people and energy, and wanting to do good and living a conscious life. Yeah.
And did you get this from your folks? Because I got a chance to meet your family when they came out for one of your events. I think it was up in Wine Country, one of your partners' beautiful homes, and they were just so thrilled. They were just so proud of you, smiles ear to ear. I mean, that must feel pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, they love the United States, the opportunity that it's given them. They're living the American dream, and I would hope they're proud of me kind of carrying that torch of doing well while doing good.
Yeah. When you say carrying the torch, that reminds me of a quote about purpose. It's a long quote, but the end of it is, life is no brief candle to me, is a magnificent torch, and I want it to burn as brightly as possible before passing it off to future generations.
Absolutely.
So I'm really jazzed to get into what you've built with Side Pocket as well. Because again, if I were to draw a big circle around the products and the services and the businesses that you build, it's one of empowerment, it's one of democratization. I mean, super high level, Skunk Lock is a huge success. It has combustible, over-the-counter, noxious chemicals that explode when they're cut through. So So bike thieves beware. And this is because you had a bunch of bikes stolen yourself. But walk us through what the aha moment was for that.
Sure. Yeah. So Skunk Lock, as with any, let's say, new company, innovation, magical spark of motivation, it starts personal.
Yeah.
I've had 7 bikes stolen growing up in San Francisco, and that is still to this day my primary mode of transportation.
Yeah.
I just love that. And that's the European side of me showing, I think, a little bit. I think the United States is a little bit slower to adopt, but I think a part of why I wanted to build a company that is solving the bike theft epidemic was threefold. The first one is because it was my personal problem. The second one is it really bothered me that existing companies were just flat out not telling the truth to most people, that these incredibly powerful power tools existed that can cut any lock on the market in 10 seconds or less.
So it's like a conspiracy theory for the bike lock
It was-
lobbyists.
Exactly.
Okay.
It was like, and I'm a huge conspiracy busting freak.
Oh,
I
really?
love it. I love reading about conspiracy theories, seeing is that plausible, but I think I'm a little bit pragmatic about it as
Yeah.
well.
A pragmatic conspiracy theorist.
Yes.
Actually, it's funny. I feel like a lot of the conspiracy theories are actually, we're finding out, there's a whole lot of truth to them these days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aliens and whatnot.
Yeah, depends how you define what an alien is, right?
Touche.
So from a different planet, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think the third one that was more surprising to me personally, but very important to me, is because of the mentors I had in my life up until that point, I did care a lot about sustainability, and I did want to live a life holistically that I'm proud of, not just tied to work.
Yeah.
I wanted to do things that I know will leave the planet in a better place, people in a more prosperous place. So I read a statistic that was really a driving force in the company, and something that we would really talk about a lot with every employee and customers. And that was that 3 out of 5 cyclists that have a bicycle stolen. So these are specifically commuter cyclists, people that commute to work or commute to whatever they need to do. Actually, when their bike gets stolen, they never cycle again.
Do you think that there's maybe like a vested interest in having this high turnover, like similar to how they say big pharma or big medicine in a lot of cases wants people to remain sick so they can squeeze more money out of them? Is that kind of?
I think there are a lot of
that goes
different,
deep, right?
it goes really deep, and there's a lot of different forces at work here. But in this particular case, it really bothered me because basically we were, by not solving bike theft and promoting bike theft, we were tangentially causing billions in carbon to go into the atmosphere, because those millions of people every single year that had their bikes stolen never biked again were getting back into their cars.
Yeah.
And driving to work every day.
Yeah.
And that really didn't sit well with me. So it turned out that Skunk Lock at its core was really a climate company.
Wow.
in many ways. And that's been kind of something that's fascinated me, is as someone who does not have a PhD in some scientific field, I'm much more limited in terms of how I can impact the world in a positive way.
Just because of pure social clout?
I think it's mostly because I don't know how to develop a carbon sequestering technology. I wouldn't be able to do that. I can build a bike lock though.
Sure.
So
a really cool bike lock that, strikes fear into the hearts of thieves everywhere.
And turns out reduces a lot of carbon and also prevents theft.
What if there was like some kind of sensor within the bike lock that when it was cut through, it alerted local authorities so they could come capture that thief? Have you thought of something similar?
I have, but then you start talking about, let's say, political inefficiencies
Yeah.
that we have. Every single one of the bikes that I had stolen, I reported it.
Yeah.
The last straw was a friend of mine had a very nice electric bike, and he had purchased the best, most expensive lock on the market. He had a video that people took of the thief. He took it to the police, and they did nothing about it. So that's getting into more of a, let's say, political problem or policy problem, I think.
Yeah, maybe it's best to focus, right? Like if you've got too much on your plate, it can feel overwhelming. I was just watching a clip recently of Steve Jobs, who said in an interview, it feels like focus is about things you're saying yes to, but in reality, it's about saying no to the majority of things. So the focusing on the things that you can do really well. And that's another thing I admire about you as an entrepreneur is your consistency. Like we all know these people who they'll do one thing for 6 months or 12 months and hop over to another, and it's just there's no through line. And maybe that there's when I think of these people's success, when they do stick to a specific lane, it's because you get more domain expertise, you get more introductions, but also people know that you're actually committed to solving that problem. So maybe they're more willing to open up their relationships because no man is an island, right? Or no person is an island. We can all. That's how we make big quantum leaps.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes a village.
Yeah.
And I know I see that bias in myself for entrepreneurs that ask for mentorship or capital, etc. I always ask them, are you going to work on this problem for 10 years?
Yeah.
And
Really?
I find it a bit unsettling if they tell me they want to sell their company in 3.
Yeah. Maybe that's, to play devil's advocate, maybe that's what they think that you want to hear.
Probably, to a degree.
Yeah.
Or they think that capital is the most important thing. I think in many ways, Silicon Valley, particularly most entrepreneurs that are fairly new, let's say first or second time entrepreneurs, their approach is upside down. In my opinion, it's usually let's raise capital, then build something and then sell it.
Yeah.
Or the right approach, and the one I've applied through my entrepreneur career, is to sell first, then build, then raise.
Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so turns out, and this is much easier today than it was over 10 years ago when I made the skunk lock. The way I validated the skunk lock was not by calling my friends that had made some money on equity at Google and Facebook and asking them for an investment. I took my bike down the Embarcadero and I started selling people exploding bike lock.
Wow.
And fortunately, I had a big backpack full of finance textbooks at the time. And I think something like 8 out of 10 of the cyclists that I stopped on the Embarcadero and asked them, hey, I'm selling bike locks that will explode if a thief cuts it. Nearly all of them have experienced a bike theft at that point. And a significant percentage of them started taking money out of their wallet.
Wow.
And that's idea validation. So I sold first, and then we did pre-sales. Then we built it.
Then you sold 500,000 of these bad boys.
Right. And then we actually raised a little bit of money to scale faster and produce ultimately, which was the ultimate product, which when you were up at our workshop in Sonoma, was the first uncuttable, like practically, I have to say, uncuttable bike lock.
Yeah,
and
the attorneys make you add that in, right?
Yes, correct. I mean, there's always way around it, but practicality matters a lot when you're on a public street with power tools.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we've got a wonderful new mayor in town. Maybe he's kind of more like the sheriff. There's a new sheriff in town. Who has your namesake?
Yeah,
Daniel Idzkowski.
That's right.
I just learned in Spanish that's called a tocayo. When you have,
cool,
somebody with your same name as your tocayo. And it seems like there's more of a commitment. Yeah, it's so strange to me because like you're a San Francisco native. I lived there for 10 years. And it's just got so much. I can't listen to Otis Redding with almost tearing up, just because it's such a beautiful place with incredible people, but it has its own demons as well. So to see Daniel Lurie come in and shake things up. Also, shout out to Daniel Lurie. He was on episode 142, I believe, if you want to look that up on Spotify and YouTube. You know, he's kind of come in with this, you know, you can't buy me, because, you know, he comes from a family of means, and I'm not entrenched in the existing political system that has caused this entire sclerotic kind of philosophy of like, well, nothing gets done, it's government, like that's what we have to accept. No, he put it in an entire new, it looks like a motorhome, but for the police. It's kind of intimidating, actually. And so like the whole open air drug market, I think it was in the mission, gone. And so obviously these things have to go elsewhere, but it's invigorating. You guys actually have a lot in common. In fact, just, you know, like what you're doing, why you're doing it, who you're doing it for.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see him tackling some of these problems head on.
Yeah.
And I was there when you guys were recording that podcast, and I gave him a little bit of a hard time with the question.
I'm glad you did.
But he really nailed it and handled it well.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy with just in general. I think San Francisco has a lot more optimism today than it's had in the last at least 10 years that I've seen.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see where that goes. And I think we do have some things in common, probably.
You had mentioned like these really pretty cool guerrilla techniques of, you know, getting early product out, and what kinds of, walk us through, and you don't have to share names, but, you know, being a local angel investor, you get a lot of folks coming to you like strategically that said, you know, I want you to be part of our team, on our cap table. What kinds of advice, what pieces of advice have you given recently for folks around kind of getting early product market fit?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned one of them. You have to be obsessed with a big existential problem
that everybody can rally around.
That everyone can rally around.
Okay.
Yeah. The world has changed since I started my first company. When it was not cool yet. The most valuable thing to a startup is human capital. It's who you're able to get rallied behind you, particularly talented people that can help you build it, market it, co-found, operate it, etc. And what I've noticed today is the top 1% of talent does not want to build soulless B2B AI SaaS optimizers for ads.
Yeah.
And that's just a convoluted example. And because they're more conscientious than I've ever seen, this new generation of talent. So let's take anyone between 20 right now and 35. And a lot of it is from a practical standpoint. They don't want to go to a bar after work and be ashamed to talk about what they do.
Yeah.
They want to be excited about not just what they're building, but why they're building it. So the biggest piece of advice I'm telling new innovators and entrepreneurs is have a deep rooted mission that you can get people behind you. And the second thing is kind of how I evaluate founders. So in addition to asking them if this is something they want to work on for 10 years or not, I also actually take them to social situations. I'm a big believer that what someone says is, very little predictive capacity over whether they're going to execute on that particular problem. What they do, observing their actions, has a little bit higher predictive capacity, but what has the highest predictive capacity is how they react to new situations. So
because that's emotional intelligence, or?
Correct. It's a different part of the mind. And I take them to social situations and oftentimes difficult situations where they're out of their element. And I try to see how they react to people that may have conflicting views to theirs, may come from
Wow.
different socioeconomic backgrounds to theirs, how they perceive that, how they interact. And then I look at, can I envision this person inspiring and leading a company with 1,000+ people in it?
Maybe on the graphic, we should have put philosopher, psychologist, investor instead of just founder of Skunk Lock and Side Pocket. But I really appreciate that dynamic. It makes me think of, so my dad worked at Lockheed Martin for 30 years, missiles and space company. And he told me that when he was interviewing, that it would be a 2-hour long interview. And for the first hour, it'd be softballs, getting to know you, and then at an hour in, he would start to grill. And to me, this, I don't want to say is tricky, but kind of, you could get lulled into a false sense of, oh, this is going to be a breeze. And then very quickly the winds change and you have to be put on the spot. And it's hiring is difficult, and it has such a big impact. I read a book last year called Who, WHO, New York Times bestseller, and it said that your number one problem is hiring, and especially at the early stages, because the wrong hire could have disastrous impacts later, and they're not lifting everybody up. So how are you thinking about hiring and growing the team? What's the psychology behind that? Maybe if you could share a time where it didn't go so well.
Yeah, so most of what I'm saying is I have the scars to prove it's right, unfortunately. So these are learnings from a maybe not as long as some people, but a very fruitful career. I fit a lot into the last 15 years.
You've lived the life of 10 men.
I don't know about 10, but quite a few.
Yeah.
But I think that's been absolutely critical, is at the end of the day, you just have to be right. And the most expensive thing for both me personally and my portfolio has been ego. Mm-hmm. So I try to identify, ego is two-sided, it's a double-edged sword. You need some ego in order to motivate you to believe that you are the person that can make this astronomically positive change in the world. But at the same time, if you let ego cloud judgment to the point where other existential factors become more important than the truth, it can cost you everything.
When we're thinking about the makeup of an individual, because we're, to some degree, we can change how we're hardwired, but the hardware and the software upon which every human comes into the world, you're pretty much set with that. I know there's neurogenesis and kind of reframing your mindset, but aside from a healthy and a well-adjusted ego, what are some other traits of an individual that makes for the best possible founder?
That's a really good question. I think the best founders have very little ego. They're entirely truth driven. They're able to acquire a lot of data objectively, process that data internally, and come up with the right solutions.
Mm-hmm. Like a computer almost.
Almost like a computer in some ways. And the ideal is that solution is tied to some bigger existential problem.
Yeah. And
then they are incredibly shameless in sharing that solution with the world.
I like your use of the word shameless there, but when it is tied to solving a large problem, it's you can be shameless because there's meaning behind it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I've kind of tried to carve my own career. I think any entrepreneur needs to figure out what they're personally good at. So what I look for personally is also authenticity. So some call it founder idea fit, right? But for me, it's authenticity. I can fairly quickly tell if somebody is living authentically themselves, their own lives, doing something that they're truly inspired by. And it takes some experimentation to figure that out for every entrepreneur or investor in some cases as they evolve their careers. And I'm just very fortunate that I was able to figure out what that was for me, which was the fact that I am not a scientist, but I'm fairly good at identifying these opportunities where industries are perhaps not being entirely honest with people.
Yeah, it's a little daunting, right? Because not only is the problem huge, but there's like an onion. There's multiple layers to it. You know, you mentioned, was it founder idea fit? Never heard of that. That's fascinating. I want to double click on that. But it also reminded me of it feels like a dovetail product market fit, which I recently heard described as, you know, the amount of pain that a user feels when you take the product or service away, which is kind of an interesting turn it on its head. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, who Charlie just recently passed, is a brilliant individual. And he had his own philosophy of, you know, it's saying, well, when somebody says, hey, you know, help me solve X, what he would do is he would figure out all the ways that X could be harmed. Like for one example, they said, hey, help us turn around India. Like, no, you know, sure, why not? No small feat, right? So what he did is he started looking at ways that India could be attacked, or maybe ways that they could fall off from an innovation, from a growth, from a human happiness perspective, and then started attacking those one by one to protect it. So it feels almost kind of like a unique philosophical approach to problem solving.
Absolutely. I really like that approach, that definition.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is being mostly comprehensive, but 100% clear is much more important than being the latter.
Yeah.
So that's just a beautifully succinct way of describing product market fit.
Yeah, you know, speaking of product market fit, I really want to switch gears. Another bike pun.
There we go.
I want to switch gears to Side Pocket. The fact that you can create this thing that is technically really pretty complicated, like dynamic portfolio reallocation strategies that are happening in the background based on your risk tolerance, that's a huge nut to crack. But the messaging to users and to investors is actually really quite simple. So talk to us a little bit about how you were able to take something so technically convoluted and challenging and personal, because how we invest our money it almost feels like a reflection of who we are, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Absolutely.
So how were you able to take something so convoluted and distill it into something where everybody's like, oh my God, I need to start investing right away?
So let me give you an example. Do you know when the U-lock was invented?
Oof, God, maybe 100 years ago.
Not even 100 years, in the 70s. Right?
Really? Okay.
Do you know when the current model for asset allocation was invented?
Probably double that, right?
1952.
What?
Harry Markowitz, PhD thesis called Portfolio Selection. This is quite simply the gold standard for if you use a financial advisor, allocator, or robo-advisor. This is effectively the foundation that they stand on.
But surely diversification is not, they couldn't have come up with that in the 50s. Like, wasn't that something that was way before?
Well, how do you define diversification?
Okay.
Particularly with this model, the way it was defined is it looked at the correlation of different asset classes. And unsurprisingly, this model worked in 1952 because the correlation between, let's say, US equities and European equities was fairly low. Globalization has happened since then. So correlations now sit at over 90%. When there's a market defining crash or black swan event, those correlations increase to 99%. So when you ask, how did we figure this out? Well, it's not that hard to compete technically with something that was invented in 1952.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't require the technical innovation did take us over 7 years. However, that's not the biggest challenge in that industry. The biggest challenge is just plain problem awareness and human psychology. The problem with those models is not, so another example is deep technology. Deep tech, that's Google.
Can you define deep tech for our listeners here?
Yeah, so I'll give a pragmatic examples because I don't find the definition is very useful. So examples of deep tech are Google and OpenAI. So Google, you don't need to understand how PageRank works in order to use Google. It's a bunch of colorful letters with one input text box where you can search something, right? In the case of OpenAI, ChatGPT is their vehicle or portal to that deep tech that's in the background, which is their large language models, right? So deep technology is solving a very sophisticated problem, but the best deep tech has an extremely simple interface and solution. In those particular cases, though, people already knew that they needed a way of searching for information.
I want to stop us really quick here because we are at the top of the half hour. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to KPCR, that's Pirate Cat Radio, Silicon Zombies, BrainWaves. That's 92.9 FM in Los Gatos and 101.9 FM in Santa Cruz. We're here with Daniel Idzkowski, CEO and founder of SidePocket, Skunk Lock, local investor, rock star, and wonderful human being. So Danny, excited to have you here. A moment ago, we were talking about deep tech, and to me, that means chemistry and physics, like these kind of like deeply technical platforms that are solving unique challenges. But maybe a practical example like you're giving is actually like a little bit more tangible. So as you were saying.
Yeah, so I like to use Google and OpenAI's ChatGPT as examples, just because everybody at this point has heard of them, they know how they work. So in the case of Google, you don't need to understand PageRank. In the case of OpenAI, you don't really need to understand how large language models work, nor do they share that to a great degree. So very similarly, what SidePocket has been working on is SidePocket is fundamentally a deep tech company. And as a deep tech company, its mission is to modernize those asset allocation models that are currently being used by virtually all financial advisors, robo-advisors, etc. But the challenge with that is problem awareness and psychology. So most people do not know that the asset allocation technology and approach fundamentally that their financial advisor is using is no longer meeting the needs of the modern investor. And what I mean by that is when a market crash happens, it does not protect you from losses. And when you lose 50% of your retirement portfolio, you need 100% just to get it
back to where you were.
Back to where you were. So that's the first issue. The other challenge with the financial world and trying to build new foundational deep tech asset allocation models is it goes against human psychology. Most people, they inherently believe that they can beat the market, that they're the exception, they're
ego.
Not the rule. It's ego. And that's what trading apps want you to believe. That's what AI trading bots that are not SEC or FINRA regulated want you to believe. And that is what copy trading apps want you to believe, that where where they just send you, Nancy Pelosi's trades a quarter after she's made them.
Probably too late by then.
It's far too late usually. So, but this is the hamster wheel that the industry wants the retail investor on, because most of these brokerage apps, they only make money on your payment for order flow. So they need you on that hamster wheel trading to make money.
Oh.
And there's a lot of papers that talk about this. One of them is called Attention-Induced Traders, Evidence from Robinhood Users. It's on SSRN. Anyone can look it up. And but that's actually the biggest challenge. It's fighting human psychology.
When we were chatting just before we went live, we were you mentioned a little bit about root cause analysis, and when you mentioned that, it made me think of first principles thinking, and that's really kind of first and foremost. Do you think that there's a connection between the two? And also, just to define that, first principles thinking is, as I understand it, is starting from scratch, getting rid of everything that we don't know for sure, and then building up upon that. So like a practical example would be what's that philosophy that people are using, economics, of zero-based budgeting. So is there a connection between root cause analysis and first principles thinking, Danny?
So I'll tie this back to why am I working on this problem? I think that will kind of inadvertently answer that question. So I'm coming from being, like you call me, sometimes introduce me as the skunk clock guy. Right?
Yeah. What's good branding,
Why not? I love it. But the next question is, why is the skunk clock guy obsessed with solving wealth disparity today? And as someone that's personally, I love focusing on problems that will take me decades to solve. I don't like short-lived problems. That's just not my cup of tea. And I like big existential problems that tie into things that I care about. Like I don't think anyone would argue that we want more people to live healthy lives with higher degrees of longevity, and ideally people to be a little bit more future conscious or sustainability conscious. Well, this brings up a conversation and the question that I often pose. And the question is, do you know what the number one first principles predictor of whether people live sustainable lives, healthy lives, and meaningful lives is?
I'm going to guess the quality of their social relationships.
So social relationships is a big one. And there's 3 or 4 of these, but one that is even more, but it's very difficult to quantify social relationships, almost impossible. So I don't focus on that for now. So I generally am a data-driven person. I don't like to focus on things that are difficult to quantify and back up by data. So I focused on the one that the data is there, which is actually financial security. You can actually look at the levels of financial security an individual has and their sustainability habits, their healthy eating habits, and frankly, whether they focus their time on things that are productive and bettering society.
So purpose.
Okay, that's right. So I spent a lot of time learning about sustainability over the last 10 years. And when I did that root cause analysis, the lowest common denominator that is data driven is financial security. And I'll give you an example, very simple one. So, but it's drastic. So the most recent data published just last year in 2024 looked at a relationship between average income of a particular, let's say, neighborhood and the propensity to recycle. So they looked at neighborhoods that the average income was sitting at around $70,000 per year. The propensity to recycle peaked at about 85%. Now, in contrast, the study also looked at neighborhoods where the average income was $30,000 per year, the propensity to recycle dropped all the way down to 30%
Oh.
as a peak. So that's a fairly drastic impact based on financial security. And I like to be as tangible as possible. We're using some pretty, let's say, big words in some ways, but what is financial security? It's pretty simple. You can go get a week's worth of groceries without having to have a calculator with you and look at every single price tag. It's knowing that if something were to happen to you, your health, that you're protected and you can keep yourself alive. It's knowing that you are building your way towards a nest egg. So when you're unable to work or disabled, you can live a modest lifestyle. So this is the foundational level of financial security that an individual needs to make good decisions. And that impacts how you can solve these big existential problems.
Wow, beautifully put. We're gonna have to clip that and put it up on our Instagram. I feel like that was just a beautifully, just a wonderful way to explain that. But tying that back to first principles thinking and root cause analysis, do you see these two things kind of playing together for how people make decisions?
Absolutely. And one exercise that I do quite often is exercise called the 5 whys. So you essentially identify a problem, then ask, why is that a problem? And then from that answer, you ask, okay, why is that a problem? And you do that 5 times sequentially. And you eventually get to a point where that is the true root cause of what's causing the problem. And I've done that exercise many times. And I find myself very often looking at climate tech companies, for example, where I do the 5 whys analysis. I'm like, this is not as impactful as purely just solving financial and wealth disparity or solving the retirement crisis. Kind of counterintuitively to like the bike clock, where we had more impact on carbon reduction than a significant amount of climate companies.
Yeah, I just have so many questions there. First of all, I love the fact that it's like, there's probably something in like the art of war that says, don't attack your enemy head on. And if your enemy is like pollution, which affects us all, and you can go about it in a really kind of clever, unique way about, getting people back on their bikes. And I know that you got the moto scooter. What do you call this thing with the wheel, the unit wheel?
I have a bunch of toys. I'm huge on mobility.
Yeah.
I have a couple of electric skateboards, one wheel bikes,
Yeah.
motorcycle.
You're practically a cyborg, I would say.
I hope. When I fall, I hope I'm a cyborg.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, like what your. And it's funny because we just talked about focus, and I'm going to ask you a question about potentially pulling you off track on that. But longevity and personal health also seem like really pretty important. Is that something that you think you'd like to tackle at some point, maybe the next chapter or a couple chapters? And I guess getting people back on their bike helps them be healthier too. So there's secondary, tertiary
Absolutely.
Positive impacts.
Well, I had an opportunity to see Brian Johnson speak, and the entire time, what I couldn't help but think is, I can barely afford to do that. How can 99% of people?
Is it like the number of supplements, or just the percentage of his day that
it's the lifestyle? I mean, let's start even more simply. Most people are working day in, day out, paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
That does not leave a whole lot of room to care about where you're getting food after you finish your second shift at your second job. Right. And then I don't think you really care if you're going to throw that McDonald's bag in the trash or recycle it at that point.
Priorities.
Priorities.
Especially when like half of Americans are dealing with crippling debt due to medical issues.
Medical issues, credit card debt, that's extremely predatory.
It's our whole economy feels so fragile when we look at these macro these winds of macro factors, right?
Absolutely, there's a lot of fragility, but the I think the financial industry is the one that unfortunately has the strongest veil or cloak, and it's the most opaque, but it also has the most predictive capacity for longevity, health, sustainability, and all these incredibly important existential risks that are posed to our society
Yeah.
and humankind.
It's almost like once you reach a certain level of plateau where you've got your bases covered, you can start thinking greater than ourselves.
Absolutely.
What-
Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly, right. What were some of the other takeaways from Brian Johnson?
The other takeaways were that I don't think I want to live my life that way.
Yeah, the guy must moisturize like every 20 minutes. He looks very shiny.
Yeah, and I don't know how I feel about living forever either. You know, there's a Steve Jobs quote that's death is likely the greatest invention of life, and I have trouble believing that we would live the lives we do if we knew we're living forever. I think there would be a degree of procrastination, or let's say a lack of initiative across the board, pretty much. So those were the takeaways. I don't always, however, this does contrast to what I think about AI and information transfer. I do believe that if we could keep brains alive, or people alive for the sheer purpose of continuing on learning and information adaptation, I think some sort of biologically driven AI would be a lot more powerful actually than a purely technical one in many ways.
Yeah, it's you know, I had a teacher in high school who he was an English teacher, pretty fascinating guy, and he said, well, you know, why would if there was a benevolent God, why would he allow so many terrible things to happen, you know, like famine and plague and, you know, all sorts of terrible stuff that dictators do, which happens like halfway across the world. We're very lucky. We're in the Goldilocks zone, to borrow a space reference. But for me, that was almost proof. The fact that we do have this ability to choose, you know, so like if assuming a benevolent God had created us and wants a relationship, if we were robots and we live forever, there really wouldn't be any kind of push or pull. It's like a relationship requires both ways. So it's I know we're like getting deep into the philosophical stuff, but I mean, I love having these discussions, especially with somebody like yourself. You know, like how would you characterize the through line between what you're creating, if not democratization or empowerment?
I think at the end of the day, I'm trying to take my own advice as well, to live authentically myself. And I believe that is what a lot of it is in entrepreneurship, and having some sort of positive impact in innovating or invention. It's just about how long you're willing to do it.
Mm.
If you can, I think most great things do not win, they outlast. It's when you match the timing in the market to the innovation as well. So I think most entrepreneurs get this wrong as well. In addition to the previous model that I mentioned, I think they shoot their shot, they end up being early, they give it all, they spend millions of dollars in venture money, and it doesn't work out. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of examples like that, where if you take an approach like a deep tech approach almost, where you know that this is going to be necessary, you just don't know if the world's ready for it yet, that there's almost a guarantee that what you're building is going to be valuable. And even the leadership at OpenAI have said that they didn't follow the YC model for that. Uh, they, but that's more of my personal philosophy on venture finding its way back to its roots, and funding things that are really hard to build, take a long time.
It's risk capital. It's supposed to be like that. It's funny you mentioned YC. Sam had mentioned a while back. He said when we look at founders, because they had done a campaign where they invested in, it was like 10 or 15 founders that had no specific idea, but they just wanted to fund them and see how things worked. There was a couple like surprising outcomes there. One of which was the importance of tracking the improvement of the individual over a certain amount of time. Like it's pretty rare you're going to get a Brian Chesky, somebody that is able to facilitate and coordinate with people in such a meaningful way to literally create an entire market. Because before Airbnb or before Travis did Uber, like getting to a house or a car of a stranger, that's a big psychological hurdle for people to all of a sudden just be comfortable with. So, as you're thinking about looking at founders, has there been any founders that? Two questions for you here. Have there been founders that have really impressed you in their growth in the short term, and that made you want to invest in them? And as a tag along, how important is luck in this equation?
Those are really great questions, and I'm fortunate enough to know a lot of people in the YC ecosystem and have these conversations quite frequently. And the rate of change question, it absolutely is a good, let's say, strategy if you're looking to raise capital.
Yeah.
Heuristic to raise capital. But myself being, a quant from the hedge fund world that's very data driven, you have to realize that rate of change can go both ways. I've seen founders that,
especially for something as volatile as
exactly
the founder game.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I've seen that quite often some of the founders that are able to learn and adapt at the highest rate of change are also able to decline at an equally high rate of change, and end up in places that could potentially be catastrophic for the company. So it does go both ways. So me personally, I do like seeing consistent execution and updates that you are doing work consistently. However, I don't necessarily use rate of change and growth of a founder as a heuristic metric, because I know and I've seen that go both ways.
It's interesting because when I hear you say that and I overlay that onto the financial reallocation strategies that are in Side Pocket, it's like the same thing exists. Like don't be swayed by the short-term plays in the market. Look at these long-term plays. Also, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I've got like close to 70% return over the last couple of years on Side Pocket. So this is not financial advice, but pretty incredible. Like just sheer from a data perspective. And I like to think I'm pretty good at picking winners. And maybe a little ego there too, but I do consume a lot of information and I'm passionate about it. And I try to stay as pull out the emotion, as difficult as that may be. But I mean, what do you equate that to? Was there like a specific aha moment when you're building Side Pocket? You're like, oh my God, we've hit on something big.
It's a long time coming. The biggest thing is the aha moment was the majority of people that I knew, many of whom had PhDs, were working at FANG companies, etc. When I asked them, by the way, how do you feel about when you lost 50% of your retirement portfolio in 2020 or in 2008? And then I asked them, do you know how much you needed just to get that retirement portfolio back to where it was? most actually did not intuitively say 100%. Some of them thought about it. It's like, wait, it's not 50%. But that was a big aha moment because I knew that the simple mathematics is being projected to the world as common, or maybe it's more so a lack of common knowledge in this case. But I think hedge funds are an interesting thing. So do you know what hedging means?
I would say diversification.
So diversification is a strategy for hedging that has varied, degrees of efficacy. But hedging, when hedge funds originally came to be, their primary purpose was actually just to reduce losses in down markets.
Was this originally in agriculture by chance?
I mean, it was agriculture futures, but you needed to hedge losses in periods of high volatility, risk, or specific situational risk.
Maybe I'm thinking agriculture because like actual hedges, like
maybe.
Yeah, that was stupid. Okay, sorry, keep going.
Yeah, but it's that's actually hedge funds were not to maximize returns to get you 60, 70, 80%, like some of the AI trading bots you might see on social media that plug into your brokerage promise, right? Their only purpose was to reduce losses when the market crashed or when the market saw periods of volatility. And turns out that's the best kept secret in the industry, because if you can just reduce the losses over 30, 40 years, you end up significantly better off. You may even be able to achieve financial freedom and retire as much as 10 to 15 years earlier.
Wow.
Just reducing those losses. And this is investing in grade A index tracking ETFs. It's just knowing when you should be long, when you should be short, and what allocation you need to be at any given point in time. But that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
It still goes against human psychology.
Yeah, and we want everything now as opposed to being, patient capital, which would be a great name for a venture fund. It probably already exists. Chamath Palihapitiya from the All In, which is one of my favorite podcasts I listen to, said when he bought 10% of the Golden State Warriors, he got a chance to meet the team, and a lot of them were his heroes, and it was super cool. And there were a couple of the star guys that said, Chamath, can you explain compounding interest to me? And it was, for him, it was kind of a shock. Like, these guys are making sometimes tens of millions of dollars a year. And, they really didn't have that strong of a grasp of, the difference between 8% and 10% over 10 years is just astronomical.
That's right.
And for the folks that are not playing professional basketball and they're worried about the day-to-day, of getting the kids to soccer practice and, dealing with baloney at work or whatever, what they want to do, retire early, like financial independence, retire early. That's, I think, maybe the American dream, right?
They call it the FIRE community, and it's growing. It's one of the fastest growing communities in the United States. It's people realize that it's not just about making money, and more and more people want to pursue passions, enjoy time with family, friends.
It feels like we're kind of shifting up on our thoughtfulness as a species, which is exciting. And we're also voting with our dollars. 20 years ago, people were not buying goods and services based on the sustainability practices of the organization, or if they were treating their employees fairly. So, I mean, I feel like we're in a space of friction where this kind of transition can be rough, but that's also where opportunity lies, and it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Danny, this has been so fun, and the hour just completely has flown by, and I knew it would. Would love to have you back on at some point here. We are community radio, so if you're interested in donating, that's donate.kpcr.org. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what Danny's building with SidePocket,
you can visit sidepocket.com.
Yeah. And just I want to say thank you again. This has been so much fun. And until next time, check out siliconzombies.com and where you can get more of the best brains from the Bay to beyond. And rock and roll. See you guys next Wednesday at noon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.
Cheers, Nick. All right.
Cheers.
This is Tony Lindsay, the vocals. Incredible local performer. He's got 8 Grammys.
Wow.
Yeah.